still milling with sweating glasses in their hands when we got to Stanley and Gloria Castles, milling and speaking in soft voices over the melancholic and refined tones of Eric Satie's Nociens, which were a soundtrack to the lives of the type of people who came to dinner at the castles. If not the life they actually lived, the one they imagined for themselves and wanted to draw from for inspiration. Gloria, in a head wrap, her black handcuff eyeglasses, and a caftan, came toward me with a hug. Many women were afraid of Gloria, as I had been, but I was becoming less afraid. I sensed she was coming to understand that I was part of Sandro's life, and that there was no choice but to accept me. Votive candles flickered behind her, giving the loft the feel of a strange and magical chamber. On every surface were delicate little flowers. Weeds I saw upon closer inspection, clover and dandelions with sprigs of ailanthus in little transparent vases, which contrasted with the old, wide plank floors, the high ceiling stripped to its framing. The loft had once belonged to the painter Mark Rothko, and knowing this gave it a despairing and enlightened aura. It was almost better than going to the Met and looking at the Rothkos. It was the after image of that, sad tones of the Nociens, Gloria in a head wrap looking feline and fierce, Stanley's mysterious martyrdom, for whom or what I never understood. On long metal tables that Stanley had welded sat various collections of semi-industrial objects, early 20th century light bulbs, antique Bakelite telephones, and a cap and ball pistol, a gift from Sandro, but as a kind of joke. It was a replica of an early 19th century Colt revolver that had been remade by the Valera Company for spaghetti western productions. Stanley was terrified of it and had put it out with its complicated boxes of ammunition and parts, hoping Sandro would take the cap and ball pistol home with him when we left tonight. Gloria steered me toward a slump-shouldered man in a blazer that looked like he'd balled up and used as a pillow the night before.
This is Birdmoor model. You'll be sitting next to him during dinner.
An auburn beard tumbled down his chin like a hillside erosion. He was short and pot-bellied, but had a kind of blunt virility. He nodded at me with bright, sad eyes, tucking a lock of stringy red hair behind one ear.
Model. Stress is on the second syllable.
But after meeting him that night, I never heard anyone pronounce it that way. They all said model. Gloria introduced me as a motorcycle racer, which made me blush with embarrassment, not only because I wasn't one, but because I felt it made me seem young and unserious compared to the Satie and Rothko mood of the room.
Well, all right. That's cool. That's cool.
He took a sip of wine and accidentally set his glass down too forcefully. Red flew upward and doused his hand and sleeve. Ronnie came over to say hello to Birdmoor. They seemed to know each other, and I went to help Gloria. Despite her feminist claims and enlightened look, the caftan and the chunky African jewelry, I always sensed from Gloria that female guests were expected to help in the kitchen. But Gloria had ordered out from one of the Indian restaurants on 6th Street, so there wasn't much to do. As she and I moved chicken tandoori and various sauces and side dishes from white paper containers to ceramic serving bowls, she told me Birdmoor was a motherfucker. I said he seemed nice.
No, darling. I mean the motherfuckers, okay? They were a street gang in the late 60s. They went around pretending to assassinate people with toy guns. Yes. I think they killed Didier Delordier. He's coming tonight. That should be interesting. Eventually, they put away the toy guns and stabbed a landlord. It was all so lurid, and we wouldn't even know about it except the father, Jack Model, was a friend of Stanley's, a janitor who worked around the art department at Cooper Union when Stanley was teaching there. The two of them became close. Stanley hated academics. Yes, right. He said Model was the only person he could relate to at Cooper, this blue-collar guy from Staten Island who lived on vodka and cigarettes. The darkest phase of Birdmoor's wasn't his motherfucker business, but when he gave up being an anarchist tough and started making papier-mâché sculptures. Birdmoor got it in his head in the wake of his landlord stabbing phase that art would put him in contact with something. some kind of emanation. He had no permanent residence. He was on the lam for all we knew. Stanley let him keep his art supplies and a bedroll here. Gave him a small workspace, and we tried to suffer through the phase, this art as transcendence crap. He worked furiously on these ugly, figurative constructions and made us listen to his confused rants about the female body and Mother Earth, shaping crude forms and talking about art moving up the thigh of Mother Earth. Art parting her labia and so forth. It was a real regression for someone whose father had pushed a mop and worked like an animal in hopes his son might get a high school degree, maybe join the police force. Instead, he was a dropout, and with such tacky ideas about art.
Gloria had a way of insisting that I track her comments, agree with them as she spoke. I nodded in assent as she went on about how bad art could not save itself and could not be saved, as she spooned sauces, all of them the same ochre-orange color, into bowls. Helen Hellenberger, just arriving, peeked her head into the kitchen and blew an air kiss at Gloria. Helen looked around the kitchen, passing over me as if I were Gloria's assistant, hired to help out for the night, and then left the room to chat with the men. As Gloria went on about Birdmoor and bad art, I nodded and privately hoped I was on the side of good art. I was not making papier-mâché, obviously, or declarations about parting labia. And I was safe in another essential way. I had not put myself out there yet. I could delay it until I knew for certain that what I was doing was good, until I knew I was doing the right thing. The next thing would be this Valera project. It was half art and half life, and from there I felt something would emerge. Gloria was still talking, something about how shooting people was, in a sense, safer than making art in terms of avoiding serious lapses in taste. She said the motherfuckers' actions were interesting in the context of the dreadful hippies of that era. The motherfuckers were about anger and drugs and sex, and what a relief that was, Gloria said, compared to the love everyone tyranny of the hippies. As we all took our places at the table, Sandro came over to kiss me, say hi.
Ciao, baby.
Because he was at the other end, next to Didier de Laridier, victim of the motherfuckers. I didn't mind being seated so far from him, although sometimes Sandro would speak later to whomever I'd been next to.
So-and-so said you were very quiet.
As if I had some duty to Sandro that required me to be more assertive, to entertain his friends. So-and-so talked nonstop, I'd say, and he'd laugh. They all talk nonstop, that is, if you didn't intervene. They were accustomed to being interrupted. Whoever was hungriest to speak, spoke. I wasn't hungry in that same way. I was hungry to listen. Sandro said I was his little green-eyed cat at those parties. Cat studying mice, he'd said. And I said I was more like a cat among dogs, half terrified.
You shouldn't be. You always have something interesting to say. But you withhold it. The only one besides me who knows you is Ronnie.
Which sent a curious wave through me. I wanted to believe it was true Ronnie knew me. We were at a massive outdoor-use picnic table with ancient-looking messages knifed into its top. Kilroy was here, and eat me, and fuck. Its gouged surface was lacquered over in glossy black. The Castles had purchased it from PS 130 in Chinatown, which, Gloria announced somewhat triumphantly, was selling everything but the smoke alarms to keep from closing down. Birdmoor turned to me.
That's who you're here with?
He gestured in Sandro's direction. I said yes.
What are you, 18 years old?
No, 23. He was looking at Sandro and about to say something more when Gloria started in about the purchase of the table, how they'd found someone to strip it and lacquer it, and how it had to be lifted up the elevator shaft, end on, with ropes and pulleys. Birdmoor concentrated on the chicken tandoori, the problem of its sauce and his beard.
Oh, enough about the fucking table.
He and Gloria squared off in lowered voices. As they argued, Gloria got up and went to a sideboard, and I had the terrible thought that she was going to pick up Sandro's cap and ball pistol and point it at Stanley. But she retrieved a tea towel and a bowl of water. She set these in front of Birdmoor so he could clean his beard. Sandro raised his glass and said he wanted to make a toast. He gazed warmly at me from across the table, his smile punctuated by dimples, and I thought perhaps he was going to toast me, my ride across the salt flats.
To Helen, and to our future. Future. Let's hope it's a long one.
As I drank to Helen, I understood that her elegant Greek air, like Gloria's stern air, was not an attack on me. The important thing was to be patient, to not make enemies. I would even try to befriend Helen, I thought. The common table conversation had lulled and people were breaking off into smaller groups. Birdmoor and I glanced at each other awkwardly. Every time I thought he was going to say something, he'd smile in a stunned or stoned way, nod enthusiastically, and say nothing. I heard Ronnie tell someone that if you weren't sure where the camera was focused in an image you were looking at, as a general rule, you could assume it was the crotch. A man named John Dog was talking to Helen about his art, too excited to tone down his sales pitch. Only a certain kind of pushiness works in the art world, and not the straight-ahead, pile-driving kind, which was the method John Dog was using.
Malevich made the white paintings, and then we had Robert Ryman. Ryman making them too, more academic and provisional than Malevich, the religion subtracted from the facture. Little test canvases of white, like bandages over nothing, white on white. Now what I do is I make white films, just light, pure light. And what's fascinating is...
He didn't seem to notice that Helen's face had gone blank. As if she'd been summoned elsewhere, but left an impassive mask behind for his self-promotion to bounce off. John Dog pressed on, hoping to recapture her attention. It wasn't going to work. But I admired how convinced he was that his work was good enough to show her, and he simply needed to get it seen. As if that were the main stumbling block, and not the problem of making art, the problem of believing in it.
They made the white paintings. I make the white films. I've been rather protective of the conditions of display, but I'm coming around to the idea of making my work more accessible. In fact, I'm open to showing them to you. I'm enormously busy, but I could make time. I could bring them the reels by the gallery. No projector? Well, I could bring one. I see. Or perhaps to your residence. I'm not opposed to the idea of making a visit to your home. We could say tomorrow.
Stanley talked to no one in particular.
I used to paint. I had to give it up. I lost contact with the paintings.
John Dog looked for a signal in Helen's blank face.
Although it's true that there is a powerful enough idea behind the works that you could just get the idea and not necessarily see them, the main thing to understand is that I deal in light. I mean, I deal with light. It's a way of portraying light. Light that is a lit picture of some other, original light. Like happiness is both an experience and an afterimage of something else, an original happiness.
I tried to keep it going. Some relation to the hand by drawing. I tried to draw pictures and could only draw boobs. I used up all my good drawing paper. Full box of lumographs. Every day was the same thing. Boobs! Just boobs!
Didier was talking to Sandro. As he spoke, he ate and smoked simultaneously, puffing on his cigarette and then transferring it from his hand to his lips as he buttered his bread, a blue box of Gauloise next to him, ashes fluttering and mixing with his rice and curry and meat.
It's better that you gave it up.
But sometimes I want to cry.
My films are not about bringing people together. They're about dividing people into for and against.
I turned to Birdmoor. I said Gloria had mentioned he'd been involved in a movement that sounded interesting. He looked at Gloria and said it might be something Gloria snickered about, but it was real. He had been a motherfucker. Lowercase, too, he said, according to his ex-wife. I tried to reassure him that Gloria had not said anything insulting, but he waved my words away as if to say, don't bother, no hard feelings.
We took over the Lower East Side. The place is dead now. If only you could have known it then, But you're too young.
The Lower East Side is full of people. There's all kinds of stuff going on there. He smiled at me like I was endearingly naive.
I'm talking about insurrection. There isn't shit going on in that regard. It was armed struggle. And the cops had come in with tanks and dirtier methods, informants, heroin.
No kidding.
Yeah. Every one of us had to clap. It gave us a bad rep. Although, we wanted a bad rep.
He said some people even suspected that narcs had deliberately introduced sexually transmitted diseases. They fought the cops, drove out the dealers, fed the people of their neighborhood, and lived a life that felt free.
Given the police state we live in.
He spoke in a flattened New York accent, which was growing on me. He seemed so much tougher, more streetwise than the usual dinner company at the castles.
In a way, it's worth explaining this. I mean, to anyone who wasn't there for it. Did she tell you we loaded our guns under the soda counter at Gem Spa? We carried these black flags. We had switchblades and guns hidden here and there. No shoulder holsters. That was a kind of unwritten law. Shoulder holsters, not cool. No hip holsters either. It's way too NRA fanatic, that style. We all had the same kind of hand-cobbled Peruvian cowboy boots. And there was a guy who sold them for cheap on St. Mark's. And you could put your gun in the shaft of the boot. Fucking beautiful boots. I wish I had a pair now.
Why were you called motherfuckers?
Because we hated women. You think I'm joking. Women had no place in the movement unless they wanted to cook us a meal or clean the floor or strip down. Now, there are people who've tried to renovate our ideas, claim that we weren't chauvinists. Don't believe it. We had some heavy shit to work out. But we were idealists, too. We saw a future of people singing and dancing and making love and masturbating in the street. No shame, nothing to hide. Everybody sleeping in one big bed. Men, women, daughters, dogs.
I told Sandro later that night that the detail of men masturbating had seemed particularly sad.
Who wants to do that?
But he said he respected Birdmoor, that the motherfuckers were something formidable. He told me the first time he met Birdmoor, he didn't know anything about that history. He remembered the janitor Stanley would go on alcoholic binges with, a tough old guy from Staten Island whose eccentric red-headed son was an equally unlikely pet project for Stanley to have chosen, a dropout freeloader. Birdmoor had answered the castle's door in his socks, wearing the kind of cheap team jacket you send away for after purchasing so many cartons of cigarettes. Sandro said the castles let Birdmoor drink their good whiskey and run roughshod over the loft, but that he brought some kind of life into their house, and the castles would probably have killed each other without the distraction of a fugitive from the law. A wave of laughter overtook the table. Ronnie was recounting the episode of his trip to Port Arthur. Stanley said Ronnie had killed Saul Oppler's rabbits unjustly, but that the rooster, it sounded like it had wanted to die. And so Ronnie hadn't done all bad.
The most that you can hope for is that someone will have the guts and the know-how to kill you with a 2x4.
What kind of know-how do you need for that?
Which made Stanley laugh.
Oh, that's good.
He was laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes, and suddenly he was really crying. His head in his hands, the table quiet, Stanley's body shaking as he sobbed.
Come on, Stanley. You devalue the tear when you do that. You really do.
She looked around the table, perhaps seeking consolation. See the maudlin bullshit I have to put up with? Then again, she might have been saying, you better not think this is funny. This was the way with them. It was all very grave and dramatic, and you didn't know if it was a joke or if it was real. Sandro said their gloom was almost mathematical, an end game that Stanley had created. All Stanley had to do at this point to keep his art career going was order neon tubes in various colors from a manufacturer, and his assistants arranged the tubes according to an algorithm he'd invented long ago, as if to subtract himself from the production of his own art. He was rich and well-respected, but he had forced his own obsolescence. The art made itself. Sandro said that Stanley's work had outmoded him the way the post-industrial age was now robbing the worker of his place, and that this truth made the art more powerful. The Castles had spent the summer in East Hampton, although apparently Stanley never stepped foot on the beach. He slept all day and spent his nights drinking and making monologues on a reel-to-reel recorder. Ronnie asked if he could hear a bit of Stanley's recorded reels. We ate silently, listening to Stanley's voice as the tape wound forward, one large wheel tracking the other.
Without clothing, nudity loses context. And yet to give the body partial context, a belt around the waist of a naked woman, a bow tie on a naked man, you see what I mean? Accessories take away the nudity's dignity, cheapen it. I know a man, a husband, whose wife enjoyed Playgirl calendars, and each year she bought one and tacked it up in her area of the loft that she and the man shared. Each month offered a different theme: a doctor, nude with a stethoscope and lab coat, a logger in Red Wing boots and a hard hat, an enormous dingling hanging down between his thighs. The wife was always careful to turn the calendar to the new month, as if the previous one had not been enough of an imposition on this poor husband she lived with, who suffered enough as it was from unknown causes. And one day the husband decided he'd reached his limit. He took the calendar down and removed all the genitals with scissors. He put the calendar back up on the wall, careful to return the page to the proper month. The model's genitals, previously outsized and healthy, now a jagged absence. Peak of wall from beneath, as if the nude model himself had forgotten to include his own dick and balls, or lost them someplace, or had them taken from him in some unwholesome arrangement where he'd bet them, or traded them away, and had to suffer the consequence, posing without a crotch area. The wife said nothing about it, and yet the way she proceeded, as if nothing were amiss, husband knew he had deprived her. This made him happy for a while, but it wasn't enough. This husband soon discovered calendars were only a touchstone for the endless fantasies that were doubtless running through his wife's mind, and he could not get in there with scissors and remove them. And so, he cut the cord on his wife's personal massager. That was what she called it, but we call it a vibrator. Vibrator! But I've digressed from the original subject of partial nudity, which is what I'm aiming to discuss. I'm not the first to point out its tasteless nature. Diderot said something about the consequences of putting stockings on the Venus de Milo. Which brings me to another related matter, her limblessness, so obviously part of the allure. It would be unthinkable kitsch to fit the Venus de Milo with arms. Her missing limbs are a positive attribute, not an absence. It's really quite strange as a concept. I once knew a man who played a hanky-panky with his wife and involved pretending she was an amputee. She would strap her lower leg up behind her thigh with his assistance and go around in a knee-length skirt and crutches, hopping on the one serviceable leg, and people assumed that she had lost the other one in a terrible accident or an illness of some kind. The two of them would have these erotic weekends in towns where no one knew them. They would pick a place on the map and arrive in their respective play act roles, a stoic amputee crutching her way into a motel office with the help of her doting caretaker. They would check into their room and then go to a restaurant where they would receive looks of shy condolence from the hostess and waiters and the other clientele. They would order as if they were on some significant date, an anniversary, say, in these Hickville special occasion establishments where the waiter comes to the table with a pepper grinder that's 5 feet tall, you know what I mean. Heavy and oversized furniture, ugly American colonial lighting, either too bright or too dark, places where the wine is some kind of grapey burgundy served in a carafe by small-town goobers trained by the management to congratulate you on your order. Excellent choice, sir. And as they ate their chops and drank their burgundy and took in the shabby ambiance, the husband covertly fondled his wife's stump under the table, her not real stump, her play stump. The 2 or even 3 carafes of Burgundy staining in, blurring inhibitions, they would return to the motel. The man, drunk now, and good and ready to get into the real business, would remain ever patient and solicitous with his handicapped wife, help her to the room, carry her across the threshold like a child bride being airlifted into a territory of freshness and anticipation. The lightness of his wife's body in the man's arms, somehow, exactly the weight of her light compliance. He would set her softly on the bed, proceed to undress her slowly with meaningful pauses and great care. Eye contact, deep and even breathing. Extra attention to the knee stump, the surface of it, rounded but with shallow areas, like a very smooth rock. The knee. And then touching the cold bed below the knee, the emptiness of it. A complicated thrill, which I myself can only imagine. Not for the lay person, was what this man said of their game, an advanced level of fantasy and humping. The idea of her missing leg was a shared space between them. It was practically a religion, and they didn't want to give it up. At the end of these dirty little weekends, when, for the return home, she released her hidden leg, unstrapped it so that her stump was yet again just a normal, healthy knee, the sight of it there in front of her was beyond painful for both of them. The real leg contradicted everything. It ground the memories of their romantic jaunts to nothing. The wife, her 2 healthy legs stretched out all the way home. Oh, this distressed her husband, as you can imagine. And he had his own interest in hoping to find a solution to their problem. So, they began to inquire. They saw various doctors, various clinics. Nobody was interested in helping them. 1 or 2 medical professionals even threatened to call the police, suggesting that the man could be arrested, which is another topic for another discourse. But briefly, why is the common good dependent upon preventing these 2 semi-free individuals from removing something that belongs to them, and that they both agree must be disposed of? What interest do we have in her leg that she herself does not have? Because I must confess, I am among those who would want it to stay attached to the rest of her, even as this seems an abuse of governance, and an imposition on the victimless sexual satisfaction of 2 people, as I said, semi-free. Well, the last time I talked to this man, we have lost touch, the reason for which you'll learn in a moment. Anyhow, the last time I heard from him, he and his wife had finally found some kind of doctor down in the Yucatan who was willing to perform the operation. And apparently there was a community down there for rehabilitation and general lifestyle support. They were planning to relocate. The man wrote to me and said, "Our dream will soon be coming true." And here I arrive at my point. The point is that everyone has a different dream. The point is that it is a grave mistake to assume your dream is in any way shared. That it's a common dream. Not only is it not shared, not common, there is no reason to assume that other people don't find you and your dream utterly revolting. Oh, dreams coming true in Quintana Roo, where we will cut off what's making you blue. We'll take it away, and you will feel whole. Oh, dreams coming true in Quintana Roo.
Stanley got up and fast-forwarded the reel-to-reel recording.
Because it's heavily into these digging, anyways, who's walking toward the bedroom out, each area walk, acting on her area plot, that you can share easement of it. The great thing is, it's a buyer's market right now. And then again, if you want to sell, it's a great time to do so because it's a seller's market right now, too. Home. We say home, not house. You never hear a good agent say House. A house is where people have died on the mattresses, where pipes freeze and burst, where termites fall from the sink spigot, where someone starts a flue fire by burning a telephone book in the furnace, where banks repossess, where mental illness takes hold. Home is something else. Do not underestimate the power in the word home. Say it. Home. It's like the difference between rebel and thug. A rebel is a gleaming individual in tight Levi's, a sneering and pretty face, the kind Sal Mineo wet dreams. A thug is hairy and dark, an object that would sink to the bottom when dropped in a lake. A home is maintained, cared for, loved. The word home is savory, like gravy, and like gravy, kept warm. Good realtor says home, never house. It's always cellar, never basement. Basements are where cats crap on old Santa costumes, where men drink themselves to death, where children learn firsthand about sexual molestation. But cellar? A cellar is where you keep root vegetables and wine. Cellar means a proximity to the earth that's not about blackness and rot, but the 4 ritual seasons. We say autumn, not fall. We say the leaves in this area are simply magnificent in autumn. And we say simply magnificent. And by the way, lawn, not yard. It's underarm to armpit. Would you say armpit to a potential buyer? Say yard and your buyer pictures rusted push mowers, planter warts, someone shearing off his thumb and a couple of fingers with a table saw, a tool shed where water-damaged pornography and used motor oil funneled into fabric softener bottles cohabitate with hints of trauma that are as thick and dark as the oil. And I'm not talking about Playboy and weed, harder stuff, amateur, pictorials featuring married people with their flab and bruises and smallpox vaccines, doing things to each other in rec rooms and sheds, like the one housing these self-same magazines. Middle-aged couples who get trashed on tequila and document with a supply of flash cubes. You have to be careful about words. You're thinking about your commission. Your hands are starting to shake at the idea of the money, and meanwhile, your client hears yard, and he sees himself nudging icky amateur porno with his foot, potato bugs scattering from their damp hideout underneath. Again, it's lawn. Lawn. Lawn means crew-cut grass. It means censorship. Nice and wholesome. It means America. And you know what I mean by America, by the way. Cool to stop. Not dead end. If I have to explain that to you, you'll never pass an exam to get your license. We say dinner, never supper. Dinner is the middle-class, semi-religious, Christianesque. Dinner is a touch-tone doorbell with a little orange light glowing from within the rectangular button. The bell is there for expected guests, people carrying warm dishes covered with gingham-checked cloth. Cloth, needless to say, has been laundered with stain remover. The type of people with stained old dish rags are not going to press this doorbell. No one with a beard. No one with a grievance. Only people who share the values of the hosts. Thank you for having us to dinner in your lovely home. Say dinner. Say home. Say lawn. Don't be afraid. Like prayer through repetition and habit, these words will begin to.
Stanley shut off the reel-to-reel recorder.
Indeed.
DDA nodded at Stanley and stuffed a cigarette butt into his food. He retrieved another and lit it, blowing smoke across the table, but waving it from in front of his face, as if it were something unwelcome that someone else had just put there. He continued to nod at Stanley, smoke going up in a tight spiral from the end of his held cigarette. Everyone else was quiet, waiting for DDA to make his comment. Stanley peered at him as if from a great distance.
Why do you look so amused, DDA?
Because I enjoyed your little ramble there, Stanley. And I know what you're getting at.
What am I getting at? Because I'm not actually sure I know myself.
The power and emptiness of words. And yet they rule us nonetheless. Are the sole horizon, the long language as the house of being, the home of being, excuse me.
That wasn't my point. I don't know what my point was, except that men over 50 can't stop talking. It's an illness. I mean, it's a real epidemic. And I'm trying to cure myself with this recording project. Sicken myself of talking. Like talking it all out. Like the Schick Center method of quitting smoking. But since you bring it up, DDA, you know what I think of language? That it's a fake horizon. That there's something else. A real truthful thing. But language is keeping us from it. And I think we should torture language to stop fucking around and tell it to us. We should torture language to tell us the truth.
Gloria let out a long, dramatic, not this again sigh. I felt Sandro looking at me. I always could. I turned and met his gaze, his mouth slightly curled in amusement.
We should torture it to tell us the truth.
He whispered that to me much later that night. Or rather, it was close to dawn by the time he whispered that in his feather-light accent as I lay next to him, feeling his warm breath on my bare shoulder, his arms wrapped around me.
Let's torture it.
People began to chat in subsets. Gloria served dessert. DDA rested his cigarette on the edge of his plate of almond cookies, dispersing ashes and cookie crumbs, and insisting that Freud was correct, that language was the only route to the unconscious. Stanley countered that language was given to man to hide his thoughts, and that all you could do with words was turn them on their sides, like furniture during a bombardment. Sandro got up to greet his cousin Talia, a woman I'd never met, whose late arrival he had been expecting. They embraced. That first moment, as I watched them, her dark eyes shining at Sandro, I knew that Talia Valero was going to take something away from me. Birdmoor was watching them too, and I had the disturbing sense that he was sharing my thought, knew by his long experience with trouble that it had arrived, but specifically for me. Sandro brought his cousin Talia around the table. Her hair was pulled back away from her face in a plain bun, and this gesture seemed to accentuate how pretty she was, and also her own awareness of it, her use of it, as if there were no need to frame such perfect features in waves of gaudy hair. She had a husky voice and a nonchalant manner. She wore clothes that seemed to have nothing to do with the times, as if she didn't have to bother with fashion, and was instead dressing for men of all generations, who would all find her irresistible. She was pure refinement and calculation. I should have gotten up to speak with her, but I stayed where I was and focused on Birdmoor, who was again talking about the Lower East Side. He said that while I might think it was the same, rubble piles and squats and graffiti, dope dealers and artists, that it could not be more different. They'd had it all mobilized. Even the bums, he said, were their own cadre. WFF, Winos for Freedom, with a cache of weaponry scared up by Fa Q, a comrade in the group who Birdmoor kept mentioning. He and Fa Q were the lost children, as Birdmoor put it. They were awake, he said, while most of America slept. And those awake are the nightmare of the sleepers.
We were their nightmare. Now everybody says, but be reasonable. We never pandered to that reasonableness bullshit. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. That's John F. fucking Kennedy. A clown who didn't do shit, but he was right about that one thing. Plus, he had a pretty cool wife. I still think urban insurrection is the way, but not in New York City. Not in New York City, not at the moment.
There were still some major issues to be worked out, he said, and I nodded, waiting to hear what they were, but unsure what it was we were talking about. Worked out for what purpose?
A lot of people think the city is decadent emptiness, empty of potential. It's dead now, currently, but the day will come when the people of the Bronx wake up, the sisters and brothers out in Brooklyn, and I can hardly fucking wait.
Sandro's cousin had seated herself next to Ronnie and was asking him what he did.
Have you seen those signs around town? Green and yellow with red lettering? And they say, Blimpy?
No, I guess I missed these.
Well, then it won't mean that much to you, but that's my family. We make the tastiest sandwiches in New York City. You might be the Valeras. See, we're the Blimpies. My name is actually Ronnie Blimpy, but I changed it. Because we own a sandwich empire, and I didn't want to forever be the sandwich guy. I can tell you, because you don't have us yet, wherever you live.
London.
Yeah, we're not in London yet. At the moment, we're not expanding. We're focusing on subsidiaries. Like how Valera isn't just tires, we have another business, which is actually enormous. You know those plaid plastic laundry bags that are ubiquitous in third world countries? You know what I mean? The crappy plaid bags that you see in every town from one end of the African continent to the other, and in Asia, and all over Latin America too. Rectangular bags with zippers, which gypsies drag around and live out of in first world countries, and people cart from project housing to laundromats. You know them, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. We make those, all of them. They're huge profits in semi-disposable goods like that.
Amada, you must be joking.
No, it's true, it's true. It's true that I'm joking. We don't own the Blimpy chain, and we don't manufacture those bags, but whoever does is making a killing. We're Fontaine. We don't own anything. But I was not raised Fontaine. I was really at sea.
You know, everybody is like this when they're
No. Actually, at sea. On a boat.
Didier de Laridier and Sandro were inspecting Stanley's collections of bric-a-brac on the small tables that lined the room. Didier paused before the cap and ball pistol.
Pick it up. It's nothing to be afraid of. You have to shoot somebody in the eye to actually hurt them.
Didier picked it up and looked down into the barrel. I asked Birdmoor about the others in his gang. Are they still around?
There are remnants and debris. Fuck you lives with his retired father in Miami. He got so paranoid he can't do anything but throw pots. He's really into that, making pottery. One guy became an anti-fluoride crusader. Another is a guardian angel. Those guys are complete psychos. They've adopted state power as volunteers.
As Birdmoor spoke, he was watching Sandro explain to Didier how the cap and ball pistol worked.
Your boyfriend likes guns.
It belonged to his father. His family used to manufacture that gun. There's a logic.
Right. A logic.
He doesn't use it. It's not stuffed in the cuff of his boot.
And yet, I'd wager he's the type of man who would enjoy the feeling of that.
Birdmoor leaned his chair back on its hind legs and looked at me. The chair was creaking, and I worried he might hurt it, and that it would gouge marks into the soft wood of Gloria and Stanley's pine plank floor.
And I think you might be the... never mind.
I might be what?
I think you might be the sort of sister who likes that type.
His chair kept creaking. I was convinced it would break from the strain of bearing his weight on its hind legs.
You like a guy who puts a gun in his boot, don't you?
In fact, I had once watched Sandro put a gun in his boot. I did not admit this to Birdmoor. We had been in Washington, D.C. for Sandro's show at the Corcoran Gallery. D.C. had some kind of weapons ban that Sandro was secretly protesting by showing up to his own opening armed. His interest in guns had never bothered me. I was around them all the time growing up. My uncles, my cousins, all shot guns. Reno's main thoroughfares were lined with pawn shops, and I understood the pawn shop to be a kind of forge that liquidated objects into money. The things that could be most quickly converted were guns. When someone in our family died, the big inheritance question was who would get the guns. Relatives would stake a claim based on sentiment. Your dad's nickel-plated Browning meant a lot to me. My cousin Andy had said after my father died it was the first gun he had ever shot. He knew my father better than I did because Andy was older than I, and my father had left Reno when I was 3, had gone to Ecuador to build log cabins on someone's get-rich-quick scheme, and when that didn't work out, had gone on to other get-rich-quick schemes. I didn't know him, and I didn't want his guns. I gave them to Andy. A few days later, they were in a pawn shop window downtown. Click, click. We watched as Sandro showed Didier how to pull the cylinder, unscrew the nipples on the cap and ball pistol, how to load the chamber. How do you do that?
Black gunpowder goes first. Then you press the lead ball down into the chamber.
Didier asked what the attraction was to such an antiquated thing. Sandro said there was a loophole. Anyone could own one, carry it concealed.
It's not considered a gun, but it is one, and it fires very, very straight.
Birdmoor didn't say anything more, but I felt a need to explain away Sandro's interest in guns. His work is all objects that are what they are and something else at the same time. A gun can be an idea, a threat, or a thing. As Sandro would put it, imaginary, symbolic, or real, all at once.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, sounds good. Except you can't brandish a gun and shoot it.
Didier was practicing quick draws with Sandro's cap and ball pistol like a Western gunslinger, gazing into the mirror that hung on the wall behind Birdmoor.
A gun is either symbolically enlisted or it's enlisted.
Birdmoor was watching Didier, who froze with the gun drawn, admiring his own reflection.
Threats are for people who aren't willing to risk anything.
Didier laughed and turned to Birdmoor.
All right, but wasn't it someone from your little gang who shot at me with blanks? Is that not some kind of hysterical threat?
That just happened. You weren't on our list of targets.
But what was the purpose? If not for intimidation, obviously you didn't intend to kill me, or you would have not used real bullets.
Look, man, you fainted. That's what I heard. Which for an esoteric guy like you is a kind of death. Little one, kind of death.
A kind of death? What crap. Merde alors. You guys were a bunch of image-obsessed poseurs. Sorry, if I recall correctly, Antonioni wanted to put you in his youth cult film. The one with the Pink Floyd soundtrack? Or am I mistaking you for some other group of cinema-ready toughs?
Everyone was listening now. Birdmoor smiled.
That's true. It was us. But we turned him down.
Zabriskie Point? You can give him my name if he's casting for something.
And didn't you guys have a kind of sit-in in front of the UN with your faces wrapped in bandage? Pretending you were survivors from a platoon that had been accidentally napalmed in the Vietnamese jungle by an American bomber?
We were bringing the war home. Would it have been better not to stage our descent?
But that's exactly it. You staged your descent, just as you say. I'm remembering more now. I heard about it from someone who was there. You all removed the bandages from your faces as this coordinating act of protest, strip by strip. Ever so slowly, reporters all around you, there to see the terrible damage as you unveiled yourselves. The few survivors who managed to plunge themselves in a river jellied gasoline, clinging to their cheeks and arms and ribs the smell of shell.
Sounds like you were there, Didier.
No, Ronnie, I just think it's important to draw distinctions between real violence and théâtre. So there you all were, screaming, look at us, look at our faces, the bandages fell away, and surprise, quelle surprise. No one was burned. You didn't go to Vietnam, none of you did. It was a hoax.
It wasn't a hoax. It was theater, real theater, like Brecht.
What does Brecht have to do with it? I think you should leave Brecht out of...
The people who watched, they wanted to see our burned faces. And if we had shown them burned faces, they would have turned their heads away and flinched, but left satisfied that we were burned. End of story. We thwarted their expectations, left them disappointed. The observers are promised disfigurement, are led to the crime of having wanted to see it. And then the question lingers, where is the violence going to show itself? By removing the thing the mask is meant to cover, we were making a point. The thing the mask is meant to cover can't be covered or seen. It's everywhere.
Blah, 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 blah. My advice would have been to give up the street theatre and drop below the radar. Go underground. Isn't that what you're doing in Italy, Zandro?
I don't keep up on it, Didier, and I'm not sure what you mean. There's a youth movement. It's out in the open.
Don't play dumb, Zandro.
The Red Brigades. We could never have been like that. Our trip was not about rigor and self-sacrifice. Anyhow, those people are Leninists. They were more like libertines.
Libertine, followers of the great wingback Moshe Bubalev.
Say what you want, Didier. He was the main thinker advocating a shift from theory to action in the late 1960s. A lot of people were reading that stuff.
I got a good story about that Bubalev guy. There was a certain group looking for guidance, a famous group. They had a hostage and needed insight on how to perceive. It's all in Bubalev's diaries. This group showed up at his place, pestering and the whole thing. They brought liquor and a good-looking girl, stayed for the afternoon, drank as the girl waggled her ass around. When it was time for them to go, Bubalev was sad that they were taking the pretty girl away, but at least they left their liquor behind. That's all he says about them. They took the girl, but left the booze. You know who it was? It was the Symbionese Liberation Army, with Patty Hearst.
Since when do you read Moshe Bubalev?
Since never, Didier. Someone told me that story, actually. I don't have a clue if it's true.
Could be true. But look, Bubalev wasn't a priest. He was a professor and probably didn't get a lot of brainwashed chicks visiting him in faculty housing. It's best not to look at personal conduct. Take Allen Ginsberg. Decent poet, had an important moment, but when you actually knew him, a complete charlatan. He hung around our scene. One night, this rich kid shows up at Jim's Spa with 10,000 bucks in cash. He wants to burn it in Tompkins Square Park to take that share of capital out of the system. He was trying to convince me and FAQ to come watch him burn this money. So we all trip over to the park, thinking there's no way he'd really do it, but it was our job to encourage extreme acts. So we're saying, burn it, go ahead. Allen Ginsberg was in the park that night. Someone told him the kid planned to set this large sum of money on fire, and Ginsberg, in his loose cotton guru clothes, goes rushing over, trying to convince the kid in a rabbinical and bushy tone to give him the money. In the end, the kid decided not to burn it. He gave it to me, and fuck you.
So what happened? You guys had 10,000 bucks, followers, energy.
10,000 bucks was nothing to us. We had steady sources of funding.
But from where?
Can't say. But it was very steady and very generous. We had accounts all over town that we withdrew from, 10, 20, 30,000 bucks a pop. We gave a lot of it away. The reason we pulled the plug had nothing to do with money. Things got hot, and some of us split. We went to the Sonoran Desert and lived on horseback.
Like a real Marlboro man?
Hardly. We weren't peddling addiction as rugged independence. It wasn't nearly so romantic. A couple of us almost died from hypothermia. Another barely survived the bobcat mauling. We were attacked by wolves, fire ants, chiggers. We suffered scabies, impetigo, road burn, Hong Kong flu, paranoia, near starvation. It ruined my marriage. That was the end of me and Nadine.
Nadine? I'd never seen her again. After that night with her and Thurman and Ronnie.
Yeah, my former wife. Ronnie knows her. Didier knows her.
I knew her once in passing.
Dog knows her.
We looked over at John Dog, who was saying his goodbyes. He approached Didier and handed him a business card, determined to make his connection before the night was over, and it was too late.
I'm not at all opposed to working with art writers. If you'd like to do a project with me, write about my work, it'd be great.
After John Dog had left, Birdmoor said,
I think they're involved, which is fine. It's been a long time. Too much happened.
Nadine had told me practically her entire life story over the course of that evening, and now her voice came back, high and soft. Her voice and her legs and her long hair, strawberry blonde like ale. The ex she had complained about, it was Birdmoor. Birdmoor who had told her that after the revolution, everyone would work 2 or 3 hours a week. That's all that would be necessary with all the robots and the automation. She had told me she didn't know if it was revolutionary not to work, but it was better. When you sell your body, you are what you do. You're yourself, and you get paid for it. Or so she had thought at the time, still semi-brainwashed by the ideas of her husband's group. He and his friends said hookers and children were the only people in the world who logically should be idle. Children because they were busy being children, and hookers because the labor happened on the surface of their body. The labor was their body. A man who does what he is useless, her husband said. Despicable. Though he'd hoped to become despicable and to survive doing nothing. Nadine had told me it wasn't a bad time in her life. She loved walking on Hollywood Boulevard where a banner said, "Wake up in the Hollywood Hills." An ad for condominiums. She'd looked up at it and thought, yeah, that's right. That's what I do. But waking up in the Hollywood Hills sounded better than it was, she said. She had almost died. She was slapped, punched, shaken, hung from a balcony over the 101 freeway, and yet as she spoke, she told me, look. She leaned toward me, revealing nothing more, just plain beauty, magnified. She was still so pretty. She didn't have to pretend to fake modesty. She had other problems. She was still pretty. Never mind that she was burned with cigars, raped. She snorted Drano by accident. But the really messed up thing was that she was still so pretty. After all that, how is it possible? She was beautiful, it was true, with large hazel eyes speckled like brook trout, and the hair reddish gold around her white face. But I had seen, the night I met her, that her beauty was going to leave her, like it does all women. For the face, time relays some essential message, and time is the message. It takes things away. But its passage, its damages, are all we have. Without it, there's nothing.
Thank you to everyone who has performed. Rachel. She's a good writer. I thought Laura's just the imperious gallows of the whole dinner. Now she's quite. I want to thank the people who read, actors and artists and poets. That's who these people are. They're all of them so talented, and they collaborated with me on this, which feels strange. They had their own ideas about how they wanted to be the parts, and so it really is a collaboration. I did not direct this. Each of them embodied the parts, and I'm so thankful to them. And thanks everyone for coming tonight.